Memory fades, but the Force does not. It holds impressions of every life that ever touched it, echoes of choices and consequences rippling through time. What happens when a single life bends that current so sharply that the galaxy cannot quite forget? The answer is a legend, a name spoken in the half-remembered stories and quiet speculation. Darth Revan in the grand tapestry of galactic history. Most remember the towering shadows of Darth Sidious and Darth Vader, the empire that rose and fell in a single human lifetime. Yet before that age, before the Sith returned in secret to corrupt a dying republic, there was another presence in the dark, a mind and will whose decisions would shape what followed. Was the Jedi Civil War, the fall of worlds and the fragile balance between dark side and light side. Revan, a name that feels less like a person and more like a mask. The story of Revan does not begin with a throne or a flagship. It begins with a gifted Jedi child in the last days before the Mandalorian Wars. A prodigy who questioned everything, who listened to the Force in ways that unsettled cautious masters under teachers such as Kreia. This young Jedi sought forbidden knowledge, not out of hunger for power, but from a restless need to understand over time. That hunger for understanding became a path that led far beyond the safety of the Jedi Temple. When the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders swept across the Outer Rim, burning worlds and enslaving populations, the Jedi Council counseled patience, restraint, non-intervention. Revan could not accept this. Thousands of Jedi rallied to a new banner, following a commander in simple robes and a bare, unmasked face into a brutal war that stretched from the Republic core to the edge of the unknown regions. What followed was victory, but at a terrible cost, in lives, in ideals, and in the quiet erosion of boundaries, once thought unbreakable. Later on, a windswept world called Cathar Revan stood among the bones of the dead and found a single Mandalorian mask left by a fallen warrior. What they found there would change everything, a vision of slaughter, a vow of justice, and a symbol that would never again be removed from Revan's face. From that moment, the person and the mask began to merge, until even friends could no longer separate the Jedi from the legend taking shape around them. This chronicle will move slowly through that entire journey, from brilliant Padawan to masked warlord, from shattered prisoner with a stolen mind, to a lingering whisper locked in battle with a hidden Sith Emperor. The tone will remain soft descriptive and measured more, a drifting bedtime history than a tale of constant conflict. Each moment will be traced calmly so that sleep can come and go without losing the thread. Was Revan truly a hero, a villain, or something? Beyond both. By the end, every face of that question will have been revealed, even if the listener dreams through half of it. To understand Revan, the story of his life must first be anchored in time, long before the familiar glow of Tatooine's twin suns and the rise of the Skywalker bloodline. His footsteps echo in a far older age, a distant chapter of galactic history that for most is only a whisper, around 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Republic already spans the core worlds, the colonies and great swaths of the Mid-Rim. Its trade routes thread between countless stars. Its Senate chambers ring with endless debate. Yet this is not the fragile, decaying state seen in the prequels. It is an expansive, confident republic, convinced that its institutions will endure for thousands of years. The Jedi Order stands beside it as guardian and advisor, ancient already and certain of its own traditions. During Revan's youth, the Jedi believe their understanding of the Force to be complete. Their temples on Coruscant and distant enclaves on Dantooine and Ossus train generations in codes that promise serenity over passion and detachment over attachment. The Council views the dark side as something external, a distant storm that can be avoided through discipline and meditation. In this atmosphere, a brilliant Padawan rises, whose name is simply Revan. No family line, no title, only potential beyond the safety of the core. Another power gathers momentum on the fringes. The Mandalorians, a warrior culture forged in armor and battle, test their strength against border worlds' raids, turn to campaigns, and campaigns threaten to become open war. The Republic hesitates, the Jedi Council counsels, patience and non-intervention, believing the conflict will burn out without their direct involvement. But the outer systems bleed, while arguments continue in marble halls. This is an era when the boundaries between light side and dark side are not yet codified in the rigid terms that will define the age of Yoda and Mace Windu. There are no formalized Sith, rule of two, no galactic empire ruled by a single cloaked emperor. Instead, there are legends of ancient dark empires, long fallen, scattered cults, and forbidden holocrons half remembered by cautious archivists. Experimentation in the Force flourishes at the edges, mystics, scholars, and even some Jedi probe powers that later generations will declare absolutely forbidden expectations of the Sith. In later centuries, focus on figures such as Darth Sidious and Darth Vader, robed tyrants, commanding fleets and superweapons. Yet the story of Revan begins in almost perfect inversion. He is not introduced as a masked conqueror, but as a beloved Jedi prodigy, charismatic, brilliant, and fiercely compassionate. His defiance of the Council over the Mandalorian threat will not appear monstrous at first. It will seem heroic over time, that heroism will twist as principles harden into obsession, and mercy yields to ruthless efficiency. What followed was a chain of choices that would shape not only his own fate, but the fate of the Republic and the hidden Sith beyond known space. His life will become a lens through which later ages judge redemption, memory, and what it truly means to fall to the dark side and rise again in another form. In the next quiet turn of this history, the Mandalorian Wars will call Revan to the front lines, and what he finds there will change everything. The child with no past. Revan's mysterious origins in the stillness before open war. The story of Revan turns inward to a quieter mystery. Long before fleets burn in the void, there is only a child and a question of origin in a galaxy where records track bloodlines and trade routes across thousands of systems. This one presence arrives almost unannounced. Revan's birth name is never given in any reliable chronicle. No census lists a homeworld, no archive preserves the faces of parents. In a way, this absence is his own kind of answer. He appears in history less as a man with paperwork and more as a tale. The Force decides to tell a moving point of gravity that draws events toward it, somewhere on an unremarkable world during the Old Republic era. Jedi Scouts sense a disturbance, not in anger or in fear, but in potential a child whose mind brushes against the currents of the Force. With effortless instinct, they bring him to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, or perhaps to another great enclave. The exact location is debated, but what followed was the gentle erasure of an earlier life in accordance with Jedi practice. The past is set aside, family names are not spoken, old attachments are encouraged to fade over time. The child receives a new identity, a simple one-word name. Revan, he becomes part of something larger than any single household, the vast transgalactic tradition of the Jedi Order Temple. Life in this age is disciplined, yet strangely serene. Wide training halls echo with the hum of practice blades. Meditation gardens open beneath filtered skylight archives, descend in quiet tiers of data and stone. Here, Padawans wake to the same routines each day. Sparring, study, reflection meals taken in low conversation. The rhythm is meant to smooth sharp edges to calm our restless hearts. Within this ordered world, Revan stands out. Instructors record a rare blend of intensity and charm. He learns forms quickly, but it is his questions that unsettle and impress. Why are certain holocrons sealed? Why are some histories of the Sith restricted to masters alone? Why must the Council decide which truths are safe? The Jedi teach that knowledge is power, and that power must serve the light side. Yet Revan hears in the gaps of that teaching an invitation to look further. Even as a Padawan, he gravitates toward the archives, lingering over accounts of ancient conflicts and forgotten empires. He studies the Mandalorians long before their war. With the Republic begins tracing patterns of expansion and honor codes that would shape future battles. Mentors warn against dwelling on war, yet he insists that understanding past darkness is the only way to prevent its return on the surface. He learns to wear the calm expression expected of a Jedi, the steady breath, the measured tone, the still posture in council chambers beneath that mask. However, the mind never rests. It turns questions over and over, searching for edges. The Order prefers to round away, long before Revan lifts a Mandalorian mask from a battlefield. He is already practicing another kind of concealment, the serene face of a Jedi wrapped carefully around a restless, unquiet will. And in the shadows of the temple's deepest stacks, the next unanswered question is already waiting for him. Mentors, friends, and fault lines. Revan, under the Jedi Masters, in that quiet restlessness, another presence begins to circle Revan's path, a presence made of questions rather than commands. Her name is Kreia, once a respected Jedi historian, now a contemplative and controversial master who spends more time in the archives than in the council chamber. To many, she appears withdrawn, even defeated, but beneath the grey robes and tired eyes, her mind still cuts as sharply as any blade. Around this time, the Order turns to Kreia for difficult students, those who argue too well in philosophy halls and who listen too closely to the currents of the Force. She recognizes something familiar in Revan. Not simple rebellion, but a hunger for deeper truths. She walks with the young Jedi through the temple gardens at dusk, asking why the code forbids attachment, what compassion means in a galactic war, and whether the Force itself can be called good or evil. The story of their long debates would shape every choice that follows. Power corrupts, but what happens when that power flows through a questioning mind that refuses easy answers? Kreia does not tell Revan to disobey the Council. Instead, she teaches how to see their doctrines as one interpretation among many. She traces the rise and fall of empires for thousands of years, pointing out the patterns of conflict, the way the dark side and light side twist through history, and she asks again and again, what if the Jedi are wrong about what the galaxy needs? During these same years, another bond forms, one far less abstract, in the training rooms of the temple. A tall, earnest Padawan named Alec begins to orbit Revan. Where Revan is the strategist, Alec is the loyal blade, broad-shouldered, quick to smile, and quicker to defend his friends in sparring matches. Revan experiments with unorthodox forms, while Alec throws himself forward with direct, unwavering force. Together, they become a familiar pairing, one mind and one sword moving in concert. Over time, masters notice them in different ways. Some admire Revan's brilliance in debate, the way complex force theory seems to unfold effortlessly, under careful questioning. Others remark on Alec's absolute loyalty, his instinct to stand between civilians and danger even in simulations. What followed was a quiet division among teachers, a sense that these two might lead the next generation of Jedi or tear it away from the Council entirely. As Revan advances through the ranks, invitations follow Elder Masters request presence in councils of war and philosophy. Young knights gather in the archives to hear that calm, incisive voice dissect ancient battles and propose cleaner solutions. Revan argues that if the Jedi possess power, then refusing to use it against rising threats is itself a moral failure. Some masters nod, seeing a future. Grand Master others grow uneasy, sensing a willingness to justify any means for a perceived greater good. In that tension, the future bends the same curiosity that chases forgotten Sith campaigns, the same charisma that draws Alec and countless students into orbit, the same unshakable conviction that the Force demands action. All of it glows brilliant and dangerous at once when those traits finally turn toward conquest and the dark side. What they found there would change everything, and the galaxy will remember the name Revan in fear, Storm on the Rim. The rise of the Mandalorian threat power always seeks a proving ground. But what happens when that proving ground is an entire galactic frontier? The answer is the Mandalorians. For thousands of years, Mandalorian clans had drifted across the Outer Rim, a warrior culture bound by armor, by oath, and by a relentless hunger for worthy conflict. They were not mindless raiders. Their strength came from discipline, strict codes of honor, and a belief that battle revealed truth. Their leaders wore fearsome masks, and their warriors marched in lockstep columns, Durasteel plates gleaming under distant suns. Each campaign, another test of strength, another step toward greater power. Around the time Revan rose within the Jedi, the Mandalorians changed the story of their people under the mysterious Mandalore the Ultimate. They forged the Neo-Crusaders, a more organized, more ruthless war machine than the scattered clans that had come before. Armor colors denoted rank blue for soldiers, yellow for officers, red for field commanders. Entire worlds watched those colors descend from orbit. What followed was a slow grinding advance from the Rim into Republic space. At first, it seemed a distant storm. Outer Rim colonies reported raids, then occupations, then disappearances. Whole sectors fell silent. Republic patrols vanished along poorly charted hyperlanes when fleets finally met. The Neo-Crusaders head on. They shattered against carefully prepared traps. Mandalorian capital ships punched through formation after formation. Boarding actions turned cruisers into burning hulks. Refugees flooded toward the core, bringing stories of cities bombarded from orbit, and children marched into camps as future warriors. Over time, a sense spread that this was not a brief border war, but an unstoppable tide. Faced with this rising catastrophe, the Jedi Council made its choice, and that choice was to wait. Their meditations revealed shadows at the edge of perception, a sense that something in this Mandalorian advance did not belong to simple conquest. They feared a trap, another great dark side catastrophe that would drag the entire order into ruin again. So, the Council held the Jedi back, advising defense, humanitarian aid, and observation rather than open war. They believed the Force was warning them to delay. This caution preserved the order, but it cracked its soul. Younger Jedi heard different currents in the Force. They felt the pain of the Outer Rim, the terror of worlds abandoned to disciplined brutality. Among them stood Revan and his closest friend, Alec. Brilliant, restless, unwilling to accept that inaction could be wisdom to them. Every new casualty report, every list of lost systems was an accusation. How could the Guardians of Peace watch and do nothing in the quiet of the Jedi archives? Revan sought answers. Star maps glowed in the dim light, dotted with fresh symbols of occupation. Casualty reports floated beside ancient records of Mandalorian Wars. Long past, Revan traced the advancing front, with one gloved hand, eyes moving from world to burning world. In that stillness, a decision formed. If the Council would not act, he would. The storm on the Rim would shape him, and what came next would reach far beyond the Mandalorians, the first Revanites, defying the Council in the name of mercy. The decision crystallized in that war room on Coruscant, but it was not announced there. It emerged days later in the High Council chamber beneath tall windows of filtered starlight. Revan stood before masters who had trained him in the light side, and in a voice calm but unyielding, he argued that the Jedi existed to stand between the innocent and the fire. He spoke of Cathar, of razed colonies, of refugees stacked in transport holds, and asked a quiet question: if the Force counseled inaction while worlds burned, had the Order misunderstood its duty? Around this moment, the story of Revan stopped being a private struggle and became a public breach. The Council urged patience. They spoke of unseen currents in the force of the risk, that open conflict would only feed the dark side. Revan listened respectfully, then answered that inaction was also a choice, and that this choice condemned entire systems to conquest. What followed was not a shouted rebellion, but a measured declaration. He would go to the Rim with or without their sanction, and any Jedi who believed their oath demanded the same was free to follow. In the weeks that followed, Revan and Alec left the Central Temple and began to travel from enclave to enclave, Dantooine Ossus, smaller academies scattered across the galactic frontier in meditation halls and archive rooms. They met with knights and Padawans behind closed doors. They showed hollow recordings of Mandalorian atrocities, troop movements, casualty projections. They turned vague concern into a concrete moral crisis. Over time, whispered debates in refectories hardened into conviction corridors, once filled with quiet study, now hummed with arguments about duty, destiny, and the meaning of peace. The Council attempted to contain the movement, issuing formal decrees against Jedi participation in the war, but the tide had shifted by the time. The first fleets assembled above Republic shipyards. Thousands of Jedi had pledged themselves to Revan's cause. They did not renounce the Order. They insisted they were defending it from irrelevance on the front lines. These so-called Revanites formed their own command structure, reporting through Revan and Alec, rather than through the Council. Their battle groups moved with a single will, following strategies that bent traditional doctrine in pursuit of swift, decisive victories for the Outer Rim worlds under siege. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history on planets where Republic banners had fallen. It was Revan's mask and the blue blaze of Jedi blades that arrived out of hyperspace to drive the Mandalorians back to many civilians. He became a savior, the only power that stood between their cities and annihilation. Yet every success deepened the fracture within the Order. Each life saved by defiance made it harder to return to unquestioning obedience beneath the praise and the growing legend. Something subtler stirred. Each time Revan chose to override the council, he reached past old boundaries in the Force decisions born from compassion and responsibility, opened doors in his perception that did not fully close again. New paths appeared in the currents of the light side and the edges of the dark side strategies. Possibilities, futures where control and protection blurred. As the war escalated, those doors would lead him far beyond the Mandalorians and toward an empire waiting in the shadows. Forged in fire, Revan the brilliant, ruthless general. As the war deepened, those open doors, in Revan's perception, became corridors of calculation on the front lines. The young Jedi who had once questioned everything began to move through battlefields as if guided by a map no one else could see. Power and compassion intertwined with something colder, a need for control that the light side alone could no longer satisfy on command decks across the Outer Rim. Revan stood over. Hololithic starfields, constellations reduced to shifting lines of advance and retreat. Masked Mandalorian commanders faced a commander who wore no armor, yet seemed untouchable. Reports spread through the fleets that he could see every move before it happened. Starfighter wings adjusted course seconds before ambushes. Capital ships pivoted into precisely the right firing lanes. It felt less like strategy and more like the Force itself arranging the pieces. What followed was a quiet revolution in galactic warfare. Revan abandoned the static defensive lines favored by the Republic. Instead, he favored feint and deep strikes, letting Mandalorian spearheads drive into seemingly vulnerable sectors, then cutting them off with hidden task forces. Entire fleets vanished from one front, only to reappear days later behind enemy lines, severing supply chains and command ships in a single coordinated blow. Over time, those victories demanded a price that the old Jedi Code had never prepared him to pay. In some campaigns, Revan ordered worlds evacuated, then left their empty cities to burn, drawing Mandalorian warlords into traps where their armies could be annihilated. In others, he sacrificed escort squadrons or even full cruisers to hold a corridor long enough for a decisive strike. Each atrocity committed by the Mandalorians on places such as Seriko and Cathar hardened his resolve. Every new mass grave convinced him that mercy was a luxury the galaxy could not afford around this masked general. A new culture formed within the Jedi ranks. The story of these so-called revanchists would shape the Order. Long after the Mandalorian Wars ended, they trained as soldiers. First, peacekeepers. Second, meditation gave way to drills. Robes were traded for armor plates and tactical readouts. Their language shifted from harmony and balance to efficiency and acceptable losses in council meetings. At the front, their faces grew as unreadable as Revan's own mask-like calm. The Jedi Council watched this transformation with growing unease. But distance and delay meant Revan's methods became the default reality of the war on the ground. For thousands of years, Jedi had been guardians who ended conflict, then stepped back from power. Now, under Revan, they held it tightly, directing planetary governments, requisitioning fleets, deciding which systems would be saved and which would be spent by the time the Mandalorians began to falter. The currents inside Revan had changed. Victory still mattered, but certainty mattered more. Questions gave way to conclusions, doubt to doctrine. He was no Sith, not yet, but each calculated sacrifice aligned him a little further from the open, questioning light of the Jedi, and a little closer to an empire of his own design, waiting just beyond the edge of known space. The mask of Cathar, a vow, written in armor. From that edge, he stepped onto a world already dead in spirit, the silent grave of Cathar. There was no roaring battle here, no fleets in the sky, only wind over endless, rust-colored seas and the soft crunch of armor as Revan's forces advanced across the shore, searching for traces of Mandalorian occupation. What they found there would change everything. The Force does not forget, even when the galaxy moves on beneath a pale sun. Revan and his followers felt a pressure in the air. A lingering sorrow pressed into the very sand. It rose around them as a haunting vision. The beach darkened, the sky burned orange with reflected fire, and the Cathar people appeared as spectral echoes herded toward the sea by armored Mandalorians. The water turned black with ash as helpless civilians were driven into the waves and cut down without mercy. For a moment, the Jedi among Revan's ranks recoiled. This was not the clean arithmetic of strategic bombardment. This was annihilation. The story of the Mandalorian Wars briefly dropped its rhetoric of honor and necessity and revealed its raw-core genocide on a forgotten shore. The vision lingered every scream, every flash of blaster fire preserved in the Force, as if the planet itself demanded witness. At the center of it all stood a single Mandalorian woman, her armor marked with clan symbols, yet her stance defiant against her own kind. She interposed herself between the Cathar and the executioners, challenging the massacre, in the only way left to her by dying in their place. The waves swallowed her body. The helmets of the fallen vanished beneath the churning surf. Over time, the tide buried the evidence, but not the memory. When the vision faded, Revan walked alone to the waterline, guided by something deeper than strategy. Hands brushed through the sand until metal answered with a dull scrape. Half buried beneath centuries of silt lay the woman's mask, its colors muted, its surface scarred by salt and war. He lifted it slowly, turning it in his hands, the symbol of a lone Mandalorian who had refused atrocity. There was no speech, no proclamation, only a quiet decision. Revan raised the mask and set it over his face. In that gesture, the massacre was given an answer. The mask became a vow that such horrors would never go unanswered again, a promise that the power of the Jedi and the dark calculus of command would be bent toward justice. As he now defined it, a barrier between his human features and a galaxy he intended to reshape after Cathar Revan was rarely seen. Without it, the man and the mask fused in the minds of soldiers and Jedi alike, until Revan was no longer just a name, but a silhouette, a voice behind crimson armor. Over time, his identity thinned into symbol, more idea than individual, more instrument than person. The mask honored the dead, yet it also concealed the last traces of hesitation and doubt. And as the war deepened, that masked figure would lead the Republic toward a victory that opened the way to something far darker, waiting in the unknown regions. Malachor, the mass, shadow, and the quiet aftermath. Behind that mask, the war narrowed into a single objective. Malachor 5, a dead world on the edge of the outer rim, scarred, long before Revan ever arrived. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power is focused through a planet already drowned in the dark side? The answer waited in Malachor's canyons, and in the weapon hidden above them. Malachor 5 had once been a world of temples and trials, a crucible for ancient Sith long buried by time. The story of that planet was written in jagged obsidian plains, shattered crust and chasms that fell into a green-black glow of corrupted magma. What they found there would change everything. Revan chose it deliberately as the stage for the final confrontation with the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, a place where the dark side already screamed beneath the surface. Around that broken world, the last and greatest fleets of the conflict gathered, Mandalorian warships bristling with stolen Republic technology, met disciplined formations commanded by Revan's most trusted officers. At the heart of those formations stood a single ship carrying a single secret entrusted to one General Mitra Sarik, the mass shadow generator. The device was a superweapon built on obscure gravitational theory and ruthless intent. It would shape the battlefield not by fire, but by weight, by dragging ships out of the sky, crushing metal hulls against one another and against the planet's own gravity wells. Revan gave the order no one else could bear to voice. If the Mandalorians would not break, the war would end by annihilating the field itself. As the battle raged, Surik waited surrounded by alarms and distant reports of boarding actions and capital ships torn apart by turbo laser fire. The command console before her was almost silent, a single control, the pivot of galactic history. When the signal came from Revan, the choice became action. Fingers moved, the switch fell. And what followed was not a blaze of light, but an invisible collapsed space twisted around Malachor Vaith. Gravity surged in impossible directions, ships buckled as if caught beneath an ocean of stone. Cruisers folded in on themselves, bridges snapped, crews were thrown into bulkheads and then out into the void. Mandalorian flagships and Republic vessels alike were dragged downward in spirals of debris. Entire formations slammed into the planet's surface, carving new scars into an already broken crust. Then the noise ended. No screaming engines, no comm chatter, only the long, low groan of a wounded world settling into its new shape. Malachor's crust fractured into labyrinthine canyons, the air filled with dust, and the echo of a billion deaths in the Force for some. On Surik's ship, there was a single moment of awareness of falling, and then nothing. The Mandalorians were broken utterly, their command structure shattered, their fleets erased. The war was over, but the victory felt hollow among the surviving Jedi. Something had snapped. Many who stood closest to the activation found themselves cut off from the Force, as if some inner sense had simply gone silent. Others remained connected, but haunted by what they had enabled, unable to reconcile the light side with the massacre they had just overseen. Over time, this wound would spread through the Order, an invisible fracture line born in a single decisions on the surface. And in orbit, Revan walked through wreckage, twisted durasteel, still warm from re-entry, the ground a mosaic of armor fragments and scorched earth. Technically, the Republic had triumphed strategically. The threat that had nearly toppled the galactic balance was ended yet, as Revan looked out across the shattered horizon. The mask that once honored the dead reflected only a graveyard of allies and enemies. Together, the galaxy would never see that masked general the same way again. And in the quiet after Malachor V, Revan no longer saw the galaxy the same way either. The path forward led into the unknown regions and toward an empire even darker, waiting in the shadows. Into the unknown regions, following a darker signal. In the quiet after Malachor V, the war was officially over. On paper, the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders had been broken, their fleets shattered, their proud clans scattered across the stars. The Republic recorded the conflict as won, and in the Senate halls, voices already spoke of Revan and his followers returning as heroes or as dangerous renegades to be judged by the Council. The expectation was simple. The masked general would come home, lay down command, and submit to the light side once more. But the story of Revan after Malachor did not follow that expected path. Instead of turning his battle-hardened armadas back toward Coruscant, Revan issued new coordinates. The fleets pivoted toward the edge of every known chart, away from the core worlds and out toward the unknown regions. Officers who had survived years of brutal conflict watched the stars shift and realized they were not going home. They were going somewhere. No one in the Republic truly understood. This decision wasn't made in a vacuum. During the Mandalorian Wars, Revan had taken more than territory. He had taken prisoners, commanders, and tacticians who spoke under interrogation of a hidden master beyond the galactic rim. Mandalore the Ultimate himself had hinted before his death that a greater power had guided the crusade, pushing the Mandalorians toward the Republic as if testing its strength. Over time, fragments of captured data and half-buried hyperspace logs all pointed in the same direction, outward. Revan felt it in the Force, as well, a distant pressure at the edge of perception, a cold current running beneath the familiar tides of light, side and dark side. It was as if some vast presence waited just beyond the map. Watching the war with clinical interest, the Jedi Council urged caution. They wanted the fleets disbanded. The Knights recalled the wounds of the war allowed to heal, but Revan had seen entire worlds burned because of Council hesitation, and he would not risk another unseen enemy gathering in the shadows. So the fleet slipped past the last reliable. our beacons into the unknown regions. This part of the galaxy was a vast, uncharted darkness. Hyperspace lanes were treacherous, and incomplete routes twisted unexpectedly. Sensors malfunctioned. The Force itself felt strange and distorted, as if reality had been wounded long ago. What followed was a slow descent into territory where ancient empires had risen and fallen without entering Republic history. Revan told his closest followers that this was an act of protection, that by hunting down the power behind the Mandalorians, he was preventing the next war before it began. In his mind, he was doing what the Council would not, confronting the source, rather than treating the symptoms. Yet every jump away from the Republic pulled him further from the Jedi and further from the person he had been. Somewhere in that uncharted dark, the line finally broke there. In the shadow of a hidden Sith empire, ruled by an immortal emperor, what they found there would change everything. This journey meant to safeguard them. Galaxy would shape its doom, and the moment Revan stepped into that unseen throne world, he ceased to be a Jedi at all. The next time he emerged, the Republic would face not a savior, but something far more dangerous waiting to return. The Emperor of Shadows. Revan meets. Vitiate power promises freedom. But what happens when that promise belongs to someone who has fed on worlds for thousands of years? The answer is a shadow behind every Sith that followed the shadow of an emperor who refused to die hidden in the unknown regions. The true Sith Empire endured, while the Republic believed the Sith extinct on a storm-racked world called Dromund Kaas. An immortal ruler watched galactic history unfold. This was Vitiate the Sith Emperor, a being who had consumed his own homeworld Nathema in a ritual so vast it stripped the Force from an entire planet. What remained was a void, and in that void, Vitiate learned that hunger could be power without limit. Over time, he forged an empire in secret, rebuilding Sith society with cold precision. No Senate, no pretense, only an iron hierarchy, dedicated to the dark side. From thrones of black stone and temples carved with ancient runes, he plotted a future war against the Republic, a war that would shape the fate of both Sith and Jedi long before any of them knew his name. When Revan and Malak followed the trail of the Mandalorians into the unknown regions, their path ended on Dromund Kaas. Storms clawed at their ships as they descended. Lightning forked endlessly across a poisoned sky. The very air pressed down on them heavy with the dark side. Every structure they saw, from jagged spires to distant pyramids, radiated the same oppressive presence, a world built as an altar to domination. Their audience with Vitiate was not a meeting but a ritual of control. The Emperor sat motionless upon his throne, pale eyes empty, yet all seeing. His voice, when it came, was calm, almost gentle around that stillness. The Force twisted, invisible tendrils brushed against Revan's thoughts, probing, testing, offering visions of victory against the Republic and the Jedi Council, visions tailored to his deepest convictions. What followed was an unraveling, first subtle illusions, then deeper invasions of memory. Revan and Malak felt their anger, their guilt over the Mandalorian Wars, their fear that the Jedi had failed the galaxy, all drawn to the surface and turned slowly until resistance felt meaningless. The Emperor did not simply speak. He imposed each word, an irresistible command layered into their minds. In that chamber, the story of Revan changed again. The Jedi General and the defiant hero were broken apart, piece by piece. Vitiate stripped away their certainty and rebuilt it in his own image. He crowned them Darth Revan and Darth Malak and sent them back toward Republic space, not as free Sith Lords, but as perfected instruments designed to weaken the Republic for a future invasion. This was the quiet tragedy beneath the coming Jedi Civil War. The same strength that had once defied the Council was now a weapon of a deeper darkness. The saviors of the Republic had become its executioners, and somewhere in the shadows of Dromund Kaas, the Emperor waited patiently, knowing his true war had not even begun. Forging a new Sith empire, Revan and Malak break their chains on Dromund Kaas. The Emperor waited, but the mind he had bound was not as silent as he believed. Power can command obedience. Yet what happens when that power presses against a will trained to question and to lead? The answer is the slow, quiet rebellion that began inside Darth Revan over time. beneath the suffocating presence of Vitiate's will. Revan's thoughts stopped moving in straight lines. His strategic mind began to test the edges of each command, examining motives, predicting outcomes, tracing patterns through the force he obeyed. Yet each obedience was studied, weighed and quietly resisted, where it could be bent without breaking in those hidden spaces. The story of his second fall truly began in the unknown regions. Revan and Malak followed half-remembered coordinates and ancient Sith charts until they reached the ruins of the Infinite Empire. What they found there would change everything. Orbiting a dying star hung the Starforge, an immense Rakatan factory station feeding on the star's energy and the dark side itself. It could pour out warships, droids, and weapons without end, a machine built to turn the hunger for conquest into a galactic reality. Under the Emperor's design, the Forge was to become the spearhead of a future invasion. Yet standing within its cavernous foundries, Revan saw something else. He saw leverage. He saw an empire that did not need to crawl in the shadows of Droman Kars. He saw a way to break his chains. The moment of defiance was not loud. There was no shouted refusal in the Force. There was only a decision. Revan and Malak cut the mental tether to Vitiate, shielding their thoughts behind layers of dark side discipline, and claimed the Starforge for themselves. What followed was the birth of a new Sith empire, not the hidden remnant that had endured for thousands of years in secret, but a hybrid creation forged from Jedi discipline and Sith ruthlessness. Revan shaped his hierarchy with a general's precision. At the top stood the Dark Lord himself, masked, distant, and calculating beneath him. Darth Malak served as enforcer brutal, where Revan was subtle. Their ranks filled with fallen Jedi veterans of the Mandalorian Wars, Republic officers disillusioned by Senate corruption, and ambitious opportunists drawn to Revan's charisma and terrifying clarity of purpose. This empire ran on merit fear and loyalty. Those who brought victory in battle or insight in the Force rose quickly. Those who failed were cast down or discarded. Conflict was encouraged as a crucible, yet always contained by Revan's overarching design. Even his cruelty served strategy. Not impulse fleets poured from the Starforge black silhouettes against starlight. Each vessel a quiet declaration that the coming war would shape the Republic's fate. At first, the Republic believed these raids were the work of some unknown warlord from the unknown regions. Then reports mentioned tactics once taught at the Jedi academies, maneuvers only one general had ever used. When intercepted transmissions spoke of a masked Sith Lord giving calm, precise orders. The realization spread through the Senate and the Jedi Council. The new enemy was not a stranger. It was their former champion returned as Darth Revan, and the Jedi Civil War had truly begun. The Jedi Civil War begins. Revan versus his own past power can defend a fragile order or tear it apart from within. But what happens when the architect of that order returns as its executioner? The answer was Darth Revan, and what followed was a war that turned the map of the galaxy and the map of the Jedi soul against itself. Almost overnight, the revelation of Revan's identity sent a cold shock through the Republic, and the Jedi Order senators who had once applauded his victories in the Mandalorian Wars now saw his fleets burning their shipyards. Jedi who had studied his campaigns in quiet archives suddenly realized those same tactics were being used to hunt them across the stars. The story of a heroic general had become the story of a masked Sith Lord, and that realization would shape everything that came next. Revan's new Sith Empire did not advance as a crude hammer. It moved as a scalpel, forged from intimate knowledge of the Republic's veins and nerves. He knew which hyperlanes the Republic Navy would favor, which governors could be bribed or blackmailed, which worlds still carried scars from the Mandalorian conflict and would fold under pressure. His commanders anticipated standard Jedi responses to crisis because many of them had worn Jedi robes themselves. Over time, entire sectors fell with eerie efficiency, as if the enemy already knew every move before it was made. On the front lines, this efficiency had a face. Jedi strike teams emerged from hyperspace, expecting faceless Sith, only to sense familiar presences in the Force. Former classmates, former mentors, former Padawans now cloaked in the dark side duels erupted in ruined temples and shattered hangars. Blue and green blades met crimson sabers between people who had once meditated together on Coruscant training bonds became fault lines. One knight hesitated at the sight of an old friend, and in that heartbeat, the Republic flank collapsed. This was not only a galactic war, it was a civil war of the spirit. Behind the mask, Revan followed a harsh philosophy. He had seen the Mandalorians nearly break the Republic, and beyond them in the unknown regions, he had glimpsed something worse to his mind. The Republic, in its current form, was too weak, too divided to survive the next storm. So he set out to break it first, to seize its fleets, its industry, its people, and reforge them under his will. In Revan's view, this was not cruelty for its own sake, but a grim calculus, the dark side, as a tool to save more lives in the long span of history. Malak stood at his side, towering, brutal, and increasingly impatient. Where Revan measured targets, Malak demanded annihilation. Where Revan spared a world to serve as a shipyard, Malak argued for glassed continents. This growing rift echoed through their fleets. Some captains followed Revan's cold precision. Others whispered that Malak's simpler hunger for power was the true Sith path. The tension between them deepened with every campaign, and on the eve of Revan's greatest victory, Malak began to wonder whether this act of mercy would reshape galactic history in a way his master could no longer control. Betrayal at the brink, Malak's strike, and Revan's fall. On the eve of that victory, the tension between master and apprentice reached its breaking point. Power had united them in the Mandalorian Wars, but now it threatened to tear their Sith empire apart. What happens when a weapon forged in war begins to doubt the purpose of its own destruction? The answer would be written in fire over the skies of a single doomed flagship. Not long after this rift deepened, Revan's personal command ship spearheaded an assault against a key Republic battle group. Above an embattled world, the Jedi had grown desperate. They assembled a covert strike team led by Bastila Shan, a young knight whose rare gift of battle meditation could sway entire fleets through the Force. Their plan was audacious: infiltrate Revan's flagship, reach the bridge, and end the Dark Lord's command either through capture or death. As turbo lasers stitched green fire between capital ships, Bastila's team pierced the outer defenses. Boarding corvettes slammed into Revan's hull, cutting through armor to deliver Jedi into the heart of the enemy corridors that had echoed with the march of Sith troopers, now filled with the hiss of igniting lightsabers and the low roar of distant explosions over time. This war had become a labyrinth of betrayals and counterstrikes, and tonight, that labyrinth narrowed to a single corridor door leading to the bridge from his own command. Malak watched the battle unfold. To an outside observer, the Sith apprentice appeared loyal, his cruisers hammering Republic lines in brutal salvos, but beneath that veneer, a colder calculation took shape. Malak sensed Bastila's presence, felt the Jedi converging on Revan, and in that convergence he saw an opportunity no Sith could ignore if both Revan and the Jedi died here. The path to ultimate power would open. What followed was a moment of treachery that would shape galactic history. Malak ordered his gunners to retarget their fire, not at the Republic, but at Revan's flagship. His own master's vessel protested by his crew for only a heartbeat, then overridden by the weight of his command. Emerald lances of energy tore through the void, slamming into Revan's shields, ripping through armor and hull as if the flagship were just another enemy. Emprise on the bridge, the world became noise and flame. Consoles erupted into shrapnel support beams, sheared away, and collapsed in showers of sparks. The deck buckled under the impact. Revan stood at the center of it all, a dark figure framed in strobing emergency lights, before a final blast hurled him across the chamber. His mask struck durasteel. His mind plunged into a storm of static and fading voices. Consciousness flickered on the edge of the abyss, the dark side that had sustained him, now mingling with a distant whisper of the light side he had long denied. Bastila reached the ruined bridge through smoke and twisted metal. There she found the Dark Lord broken, yet not gone through the Force. She felt a tempest of memories rage and buried compassion, and she understood that killing him would be simple. But ending the story of this man might cost the Republic a chance. It did not yet comprehend drawing on her battle meditation. She inverted its usual purpose. Instead of amplifying armies, she focused it inward, a single steadying thread. She wrapped Revan's failing presence in calm, suspended his life between breaths, and held him there. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. Jedi healers and troopers moved quickly. Revan's armor was cut away, his iconic mask removed and cast aside, revealing a face that was strangely ordinary for a figure who had shattered fleets. In that moment, the Dark Lord of the Sith ceased to exist in the eyes of the galactic war reports. The Republic announced his death. The Sith Empire staggered without its master, and the Jedi believed a great darkness had finally fallen. Yet beneath that quiet triumph, the Force stirred. What they found there would change everything, because Revan's story was only halfway told. Erasing a Sith Lord. The Jedi Council's dangerous experiment in the quiet that followed Revan's fall. The Jedi finally saw the Dark Lord not as a storm on a view screen, but as a broken figure on the Council chamber floor. His armor and mask were gone, stripped away by Republic hands, yet even unconscious, he radiated power through the Force, a dense pressure in the air that made even masters on the High Council uneasy. This was the man who had shattered fleets and bent entire sectors to his will, and now he lay defenseless at their feet. Around this moment, the Jedi Order faced a question as heavy as any in its history. What should be done with a fallen champion whose genius had nearly destroyed the Republic? Some argued that execution was the only way to be certain the dark side would never claim the galaxy through him again. Others spoke for permanent imprisonment to lock Revan away in some distant fortress where his influence could never spread. But what followed was a proposal far more radical and far more dangerous. One group of masters suggested using the Force itself to erase and rebuild Revan's mind. The story of Darth Revan would not end in death or chains. Instead, the Jedi would unmake the Sith Lord and shape what remained into a potential ally, a weapon turned back against the very empire he had forged. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, yet it sat uneasily on the edge, between compassion and control, between the light side and something far more uncertain. The procedure unfolded in long meditative sessions. Revan's mind was approached as if it were a tangled archive of war and betrayal. Memories were gently unspooled, examined and severed. The identity of Darth Revan the Sith Lord was cut away, strand by strand. What remained was a hollowed framework, a brilliant but fractured consciousness. Around this, the Council suggested a new self, a loyal servant of the Republic, unaware of the atrocities he had once commanded, a fragile amnesiac. Revan was constructed around a dormant core of immense latent power, ready to awaken, but carefully walled off. Over time, the ethical cost of this decision became clearer. The Jedi were not simply offering redemption, they were overriding Revan's will, erasing choices both noble and monstrous, and replacing them with a life built on a mission. What did consent mean when the subject could not even remember the question? Was this truly the light side at work, or a quieter, more palatable form of domination? The conflict between their ideals and their actions would shape how later generations judged this moment. When the process was complete, the Council did not keep Revan hidden. Instead, they sent him back into the galactic conflict as a Republic asset, paired with Jedi Watchers and Republic handlers. He moved through worlds he had once conquered, without knowing it, yet the Force has long memory, and the dark side leaves deep scars. Soon shadows of forgotten battles, old allies and ancient enemies would begin to stir around him, and the man who had been two people would be forced to decide which self was truly his. Awakening on the Endar Spire, a life without a past. In the quiet moments after a mind is broken and rebuilt, the galaxy can feel strangely distant. Power, once absolute, becomes a faint echo at the edge of awareness. The story of Revan's second life begins in such a hush, broken only by metal and distant fire aboard the Endar Spire. The air trembled with a low mechanical hum. The ship drifted at the edge of battle alarms pulsed through the corridors, not in frantic shrieks, but in steady, measured warnings. Red emergency lights washed the narrow halls in muted color shadows stretched along durasteel panels as the Republic cruiser shuddered under turbo laser fire. In a small crew cabin, a man lay on a bunk, eyes closed, lost in a darkness deeper than sleep. Then consciousness returned, not as memory, but as sensation. The rough fabric of a standard-issue uniform against skin. The taste of recycled air. The faint vibration of engines running under stress. There was no name, no past, no clear image of a face in the mirror. Only the awareness of a body ready to move before thought could catch up when the door hissed open and the first explosion echoed through the frame. His hands were already bracing for impact, without knowing why. Disorientation followed. Every movement felt practiced. Every step, through the dim corridor, carried the certainty of someone who had walked battlefields for thousands of years, yet the mind behind those steps was blank. When a blaster was thrust into his hands, the weight was instantly familiar. Fingers found the grip and trigger with unthinking precision. The first shot snapped down the hall, clean and controlled, as if decades of training guided it. But there was no memory of instructors, no recollection of war, only the strange calm of muscle memory acting on its own. In the chaos, a voice cut through steady and guarded Cathar. Onasi, a Republic soldier and veteran of earlier conflicts, appeared as the first anchor in this new existence. He knew only that the ship was failing, that Sith forces under Darth Malak were closing in, and that this unknown recruit had to reach the escape pods Cathar spoke with. The clipped focus of someone who had lost too much to trust easily. He offered instructions, cover fire, and a path through the burning decks, but not answers, because he had none. What followed was a quiet irony. The former Dark Lord of the Sith moved through cramped Republic corridors, treated as an ordinary soldier, following orders from a man who had once feared his name. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, yet in that moment it felt simple. Survive. Reach the escape pod. Follow Cathar's lead over time. The Endar Spire became only the first test of an identity built on absence, as the last escape pod tore free from the dying cruiser. The stars outside the viewport spun in a slow, graceful arc. Flames from the Endar Spire reflected across the transparent steel canopy, then fell away. Replaced by the looming curve of a distant world, Taris waited below, unaware that a fallen conqueror was descending upon it with no memory of the Empire. He had forged the pod, tumbled through atmosphere, a sealed vessel carrying a forgotten past toward a planet that would shape what came next. Taris and Bastila, threads of the past, resurface. The pod struck the upper atmosphere of Taris, and the world unfolded beneath it, a vast ring of steel and duracrete, wrapped around a forgotten core from orbit. The planet glowed with the soft haze of a single endless city, but closer in the truth emerged light and shadow stacked in layers, each one telling a different story of power and neglect. In the upper city towers pierced the smog, their windows burning with steady artificial daylight. Airspeeders drifted between them in orderly streams, and the citizens walked polished walkways, convinced that galactic conflict remained far away. Beneath those bright platforms, the lower city sagged under age, and rust neon signs flickered over cramped streets. Swoop engines snarled in the distance, and gangs marked territory where the law no longer reached below. Even that the undercity festered in darkness where the Rakghoul plague turned the forgotten poor into monsters. Over time, Taris had become a monument to division, a stratified world unaware that a Sith warship already hunted it from the void. Revan woke here, not as a Dark Lord, but as a wounded Republic soldier, guided by Cathar Onasi and by orders to find a single missing Jedi, Bastila. Her name carried weight even among non-Force sensitives, a young prodigy whose rare gift of battle meditation could turn the tide of entire fleets in the Force. Her presence was a bright, focused flame during Revan's capture, above the Endar Spire. That flame had touched his fractured mind. What followed was more than simple rescue. A subtle bond had formed between them, threads of awareness that neither fully understood. Stranded in the lower city, Revan began the search for Bastila. The trail wound through swoop gangs, black markets, and the quiet desperation of those trapped beneath the upper city's glow. To reach her, he negotiated with crime lords calmed. Volatile tempers and map-shifting alliances with unnerving ease on the surface. This was survival. Yet the patterns ran deeper. Every conversation became an assessment. Every alley a battlefield laid out in his thoughts without effort. This was the story of an old general resurfacing in a man who believed himself ordinary. There were moments when the mask slipped, not the metal mask of Darth Revan, but the habits forged during the Mandalorian Wars. A glance at a swoop track turned into precise calculations of angles and acceleration. A casual remark about security revealed a flawless understanding of patrol cycles. Companions noticed that his plans rarely failed, that in chaos, he moved as if the Force itself whispered. The next step was he truly just a lucky recruit, or was something older, steering his choices from the shadows of memory when Bastila was finally found a captive prize of the swoop gangs. Her rescue felt less like chance and more like inevitability. Together they escaped to the upper city, just as Darth Malak's fleet dropped from hyperspace and the siege began. Turbo laser fire raked the planet's surface. Towers crumbled into the lower levels. Flames cascaded downward through the very layers that had once separated rich from poor as their stolen ship tore free of the atmosphere. Taris burned behind them, consumed in a single ruthless command, a chilling echo of the scale of destruction Revan himself had once unleashed. And ahead, beyond the smoke, waited the next world and the next secret that would shape what came next. Hunting the star maps, a journey across the old Republic, leaving the burning shell of Taris behind the stolen freighter, slipped back into the quiet lanes of hyperspace. In that silence, a pattern began to emerge. The Jedi Council revealed a buried truth. Revan in another life had hunted ancient Rakatan star maps scattered across the galaxy, using them to trace a route to an unknown superweapon. The Starforged now, to stop Malak the amnesiac Revan, would have to follow the same trail step by careful step on distant Dantooine. The story of this new journey began among soft winds and endless grass. The Enclave's masters spoke of ruins older than the Republic of a subterranean chamber where the Force pulled around alien technology there. In the cool, dim light, Revan touched the first star map, its fractured holographic surface humming with memory. What they found there would change everything. This was proof that the Sith Empire Revan once led had been built on secrets far older than any Jedi war. What followed was a gentle rhythm of travel and discovery. A slow orbit around the edges of past and present Tatooine offered a harsh counterpoint to Dantooine's calm, a desert of blinding dunes and skeletal crate dragons. Here, the search for another map wound through moisture farms, hunting camps, and the hollow pride of the Zerka Corporation. Every choice mattered, whether to bargain fairly with desperate settlers or exploit them, whether to spare a wounded sandperson chieftain or end a potential threat. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history or harden it in ways unseen on Kashyyyk. The path led downward instead of outward, through towering Risha forests into the shadowed undergrowth, where the air grew thick and old. The conflict between Circa slavers and Wookiee clans mirrored the larger galactic struggle for power and freedom. Beside Revan walked Mission Vao, and Zaalbar Mission saw only a leader who listened and protected, while Zaalbar sensed something deeper, an echo in Revan's presence that stirred ancient Wookiee instincts of oath and debt over time. Their loyalty was not to a Sith Lord or Jedi Savior, but to the quiet authority at the center of their shared danger further along the trail. The ocean world of Manaean imposed its own stillness. Kolto fields drifted beneath grey waves, while the Selkath enforced strict neutrality between Republic and Sith. Here, the search for the map unfolded through legal hearings and subtle espionage rather than open battle. The light side and dark side both whispered in every decision to bend the rules for a greater good or respect the fragile balance that kept the galactic war at bay. Companions reacted in different ways. Jolie Bindo watched with amused suspicion, convinced that fate was repeating itself. Hulk 47 registered something pleasingly familiar in Revan's efficiency in dealing with enemies, even if the memory refused to fully surface yet. With each recovered fragment of the Rakatan network, the circle tightened. Every new star map pointed toward the same dark region of space, the birthplace of the Starforge and of Revan's fall. The Jedi could delay the truth, but not erase it. For thousands of years, empires had risen and collapsed on lesser secrets. Soon the final coordinates would resolve, and when they did, the question of who Revan really was would no longer remain safely unanswered. The revelation, remembering Darth Revan. Soon the final coordinates would resolve. And when they did, the question of who Revan really was would no longer remain safely unanswered. Instead, the answer arrived early in the cold metal corridors of a Sith flagship, the Leviathan, where stealth and strategy finally failed, captured by the Empire. He had once tried to destroy. The crew of the Ebon Hawk found themselves in restraints under harsh white lights. The calm hunt for star maps gave way to durasteel walls and the steady hum of a warship. Deep in Sith space, aboard the Leviathan, Admiral Saul Karath separated the prisoners with clinical precision Bastilla. Cart mission, a Canderous each pulled away for interrogation. The old Republic officer, turned traitor, took satisfaction in methodical cruelty, yet he was only the prelude. The true revelation belonged to another when Darth Malak strode into the chamber. The atmosphere changed. The apprentice who had fired on his own master now stood as Dark Lord of the Sith, and the man chained before him was the last loose thread of an unfinished war. Malak's voice carried the cold satisfaction of a long-prepared confession. He did not see a new hero of the Republic in front of him. He saw a broken weapon, a mask without the mask, power stripped away and reshaped by enemy hands with deliberate cruelty. He explained that the prisoner once wore the title. He now claimed that this was Darth Revan, Lord of the Sith, commander of fleets, butcher of worlds, the very master Malak had served before treachery and turbolasers ended their alliance. What followed was not a duel, but a dismantling of identity forced into the open Bastilla, and the Jedi Council's secret could no longer remain hidden. They admitted that on the bridge of Revan's flagship, after Malak's betrayal, they had chosen an unorthodox path rather than execute the fallen Lord. They used the Force to shatter his mind, erase the memories of the Sith Empire he had built, and implant a new persona, a loyal servant of the Republic. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, yet it was also an act of control. The Council hoped that from the ruins of a Sith tyrant, a better Revan would emerge in the quiet between accusations. The true conflict unfolded inside Revan himself. He heard of campaigns he could not remember, of the Mandalorian Wars, where a brilliant Jedi general defied the Council, and of the Jedi Civil War that followed. Entire systems burned in his name. Yet his mind held only scattered echoes, faces of companions, rescued worlds, saved choices made in service to the light side. Could a person be responsible for crimes remembered only by others, when the Force itself had rewritten his past? The story of Revan reached a fragile balance. In that moment, two lives, one body a warlord and a weary knight. Over time, this question would shape every step he took, from the Leviathan forward, reclaim the mantle of Darth Revan and the terrible power that came with it, or continue along the uncertain path of a reborn Jedi servant of the Republic. The ship's engines rumbled indifferent as the Force waited to see which self was truly real and which was only a shadow. Choosing a new path. Revan's second fall or second rise. In that quiet moment after the Leviathan, the Force seemed to hold its breath. Power had been stripped bare, masks torn away, and the man once called Darth Revan stood at a crossroads between two futures, both already stained in blood from this point in the timeline. The story of Revan no longer has only one answer. Historians of the Jedi and chroniclers of the Sith speak of branching paths of different choices made aboard different ships in the same cold stars. Yet in the broader Old Republic narrative, one version endures above the rest. The Revan who turns away from the mantle of Dark Lord and refuses to rebuild the empire he once commanded on the light path. What followed was not a sudden cleansing, but a conscious, sustained rejection of that old identity. Revan hears Bastilla's Plecath's anger, Juhani's fragile hope, and chooses not to seize control of the war effort again. Instead of uniting the Republic fleet under a reborn Sith strategist, he commits to stopping Malak and dismantling the dark war machine. He designed the star maps that once guided conquest become beacons to be extinguished one by one. Each ruined temple and hidden forge, a reminder of what his brilliance had already done to the galactic core. This Revan is not simply the old warlord redeemed. He is something stranger. A new person carrying the burden of another's sins, haunted by flashes of the Mandalorian Wars and the early Jedi Civil War, yet unable to feel the certainty that once drove them into the unknown regions over time. This tension would shape every decision he makes. He apologizes for bombardments he only half remembers, shows mercy to enemies his former self would have executed, and stands beside Jedi Councils that once feared his influence. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, not because it erases the past, but because it accepts that the past can never fully be erased, yet the line between salvation and damnation remains thin. In other tellings of this era, Revan fully embraces his Sith nature again. He turns on companions on the deck of the Starforge. He executes dissenters and claims the ancient station's endless fleets as his own. What they found there would change everything. An empire reborn under a Dark Lord who remembers every atrocity and feels no need to apologize. The Republic falls. The Jedi are hunted, and the war never truly ends for the purposes of his larger legacy. However, it is the Revan who walks back toward the light side still shaped by darkness, who endures. This is the Revan who will one day leave his family behind, vanish into the unknown regions, and confront the true Sith Emperor again. A weary knight, carrying both futures within him as the next chapter of his long conflict with the dark side quietly begins. The fall of Malak and the Starforge, ending one war, revealing another. In the quiet that follows any great revelation, there is always one more battle. Waiting in the dark, Revan's long walk back toward the light side did not end in meditation or exile. It ended at the heart of a machine that had nearly broken the galaxy, the Starforge. By the time the Republic finally located this ancient factory, the war had drained its strength. Fleets were shattered, worlds exhausted, and the Jedi Order reduced to scattered enclaves. Yet there was no choice. The Starforge had to fall, or the Sith Empire would drown the Republic in an endless tide of fresh warships. What followed was a desperate assault that pushed the last loyal crews and commanders beyond their limits as the combined Republic and Jedi task force emerged from hyperspace above the Lehon system. They found a nightmare hanging over the gas giant. The Starforge burned against the void, a dark halo of metal and energy, already spitting out new Sith cruisers and fighter screens every moment the battle unfolded as a brutal equation of attrition for every enemy ship. Destroyed the Forge birthed another. The only real hope rested on Revan and the small strike team that slipped through the chaos to infiltrate the station itself. Inside the Starforge, Revan moved through corridors steeped in the dark side. Ancient Rakatan machinery pulsed with stolen stellar energy. Sith troopers and dark Jedi threw themselves forward in waves, but over time they fell to a familiar rhythm. Bastilla's battle meditation steadying the Republic fleet mission, and Zalbar cutting paths through defenders, Juhani Kandarus, and the others holding the line. This was the story of a former Sith Lord returning to the throne of his own empire, not to claim it, but to end it at the core of the station. Revan finally confronted Darth Malak. Two former friends, once student and teacher, now fully opposed. Malak towered behind his metal jaw, a brutalist answer to every doubt he had ever carried about mercy or restraint. His power was raw, unrestrained, fueled by captured Jedi, bound in stasis pods around the chamber, their life drained to feed his strength. Revan, by contrast, fought with a tempered focus. Each movement measured a fusion of dark side experience and renewed allegiance to the light side. The duel raged across the chamber blades, clashing against the backdrop of screaming machinery. Malak broke the stasis pods one by one, drawing more power, even as the structure groaned around them. Yet in the end, his fury could not overcome Revan's calm precision. Wounded and defeated, Malak lay on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of his own ambitions. On the light path, Revan offered him something no one had ever given him a chance, at understanding a final moment to see beyond fear and control. But Malak died as he had lived clinging to power, convinced that only domination mattered, unable to accept that this act of mercy would reshape galactic history. If he allowed it with Malak gone, the Starforge's will faltered Revan, and his companions sabotaged its reactors and control systems, severing its connection to the dark side. Outside, the Republic fleet pressed its advantage as the station began to tear itself apart. The Scythe Empire Revan had built and Malak had twisted collapsed in flame, leaving only wreckage and drifting hulls to mark the end of the Jedi Civil War. In the aftermath, Revan stood before cheering soldiers and grateful Jedi Masters hailed across holofeeds as the savior of the Republic. For many, this victory would shape their understanding of the conflict for thousands of years. A fallen warlord redeemed a superweapon, destroyed peace, restored. Yet privately, Revan knew the truth. The Emperor, who had first broken his mind, still waited in the unknown regions, unchallenged. The real war, the long unseen struggle with the true Sith Empire, had not yet begun, and somewhere beyond charted space, the dark side was already preparing its answer. Restless peace, visions, warnings, and the call back to the unknown. Region's peace returned to the Republic, but it was a fragile quiet. The Starforge was gone, Malak was dead, and the triumphant narrative was simple. A redeemed hero, a restored alliance between Jedi and Senate, a galaxy ready to heal. Yet beneath the celebrations, the Force carried an uneasy echo, a sense that the Great War just ended had only been a shadow on the wall of a deeper cavern. In the first years after Malak's defeat, shipyards lit the skies over core worlds. Reconstruction fleets crossed the hyperlanes, and worlds shattered by orbital bombardment began to rebuild. The Jedi Order gathered its survivors on Dantooine and Coruscant, trying to make sense of its own failures. The Council had sanctioned mind wipes, secret trials, and quiet exiles. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, but it also left questions that no meditation could fully silence. Revan lived inside that uneasy peace. On some worlds, the former Dark Lord walked openly as the savior of the Republic. On others, Revat took no name at all, traveling under simple robes, avoiding politics and command structures. For a time, Revan and Bastila Shan attempted to build something resembling a life together, a bond forged in battle meditation and redemption, translated into shared quiet moments on distant terraces, watching unfamiliar suns set across alien oceans. It should have been enough. It was not over time. The nights changed. At first, the dreams were scattered impressions, a flash of storm-racked sky, a cold throne room lit by blue-white lightning, a circle of robed figures kneeling before an unseen master. Then the visions sharpened. They showed a world drowned in perpetual tempest, Droman Chaos, capital of a hidden Sith empire. They showed the Emperor's eyes ancient and utterly patient, and behind those eyes, something vast and hungry, moving in the dark, a will that had waited for thousands of years. Sometimes the memories arrived without warning during a conversation, during a shared meal, during a moment of rare laughter. Reality would tilt, and Revan would remember standing as a loyal servant of that unseen Emperor, charting invasion routes, consigning entire sectors to future conquest. The revelation was simple and terrible. The Jedi Civil War had been a test, a probing strike against the Republic's defenses. The story of Revan as lone mastermind had been incomplete. Revan had been a pawn in meditation chambers and in restless sleep. The conclusion became inescapable. Leaving the true Sith Empire untouched would doom the galaxy. The Republic's shipyards, its new fleets, its hopeful treaties meant nothing against an enemy that had spent centuries perfecting control of the dark side. What followed was a quiet decision, made without council debate or Senate decree. Revan would disappear again into the unknown regions, this time not as a conqueror or an amnesiac weapon, but as a fully aware adversary, stepping back into the storm. Revan left letters, holo recordings, and a final promise to Bastila and to the Order Then one ship slipped beyond the last nav beacons, following half-remembered coordinates toward Dromund-Kaas, and what they found there would change everything. The second exile, leaving loved ones and legends. Behind power can be loud in the Star Wars galaxy, but sometimes the most decisive acts happen in whispers and closed rooms. The story of Revan's second exile begins not with a battle, but with farewells that almost no one witnesses. There is no grand parade for the hero of the Jedi Civil War. No public trial for the former Dark Lord, only quiet conversations and choices that would shape everything that followed. In most accounts, the final parting with Bastila is subdued two warriors who once shared a battle meditation across entire fleets, now share a small room and a few uncertain promises. She has stood at the center of conflict as both prisoner and savior of the Republic. He has been her captor, her redeemer, her partner. Bastila asks the question no council dares to voice. Why must he go when the war is finally over? Revan answers not with doctrine, but with a simple truth. The dark side beyond the unknown regions has not finished with the galaxy. For some tellings that farewell includes a child, an infant who will never truly know, the figure who holds them. For the last time, Revan's hand lingers on a tiny forehead, then falls away. There are no dramatic speeches, no vows of eternal return, only the quiet understanding that this act of mercy would reshape galactic history, not through romance but through absence, through the deliberate choice to walk away from any chance at a normal life. Around this same period, companions from the Ebenhawk receive their own muted goodbyes. Canderous Ordo hears a request to unite the Mandalorians again mission, and Zalbar sensed that their friend is already half gone, even while standing before them. In some versions, Revan stands once more before the Jedi Council, the same institution that broke and rebuilt his mind. There is no shouting, no trial, just a final acknowledgement that the Order cannot follow where the Force is pulling him. Revan leaves almost nothing behind. For historians, there are a few hollow recordings, a handful of coordinates, no clear destination over time. These fragments become a puzzle for Jedi scholars and Sith agents alike, visions in the Force point toward the unknown regions, but never quite agree. Some sense a drowned world, others a throne of hunger and silence. The records are maddeningly incomplete by design. Revan is choosing to become a ghost in history when his ship finally lifts from the Republic dockyards. It is unremarkable. One more vessel vanishing into the traffic lanes, yet as it reaches the edge of map space, the tone changes. The last beacons fall behind. The stars thin into white lines and the ship plunges into hyperspace toward Dromund-Kaas. In that moment, Revan's presence in the known galaxy contracts to a rumor, a legend half believed in Jedi temples and Sith archives. What followed was not immediate revelation, but a long absence that would echo through future wars. His physical form leaves the stage here, yet his influence continues to ripple through empires and orders he will never see again. For the next 1,000 years, Dark Lords and reluctant heroes will chase his shadow. The question waiting beyond the unknown regions is simple and terrible. What exactly has Revan gone out there to face, captured by the Emperor? Centuries in the dark, beyond the unknown regions, the answer waiting for Revan is not a fleet or a throne, but a single presence in the dark, a will that has stared across galactic history for thousands of years and refused to blink. The question of what he has gone out there to face resolves into one name: the immortal Sith Emperor Vitiate. When Revan finally reaches Dromund-Kaas, it is not as a conqueror at the head of a vast armada, but as a seeker accompanied by Mitra Sarik. The exile of the Mandalorian Wars both have walked the line between light side and dark side. Both understand that this hidden empire must be stopped before its war machines pour into known space. Their plan is direct, almost simple. Find the Emperor and end him before he can move in the echoing halls of the Imperial Citadel. That plan-dies Vitiate is waiting this time. Not as a distant rumor or a disembodied voice, but as a focused storm in human form. The last time Revan stood before him, he was broken and remade into a Sith Lord, Now he advances with full knowledge of that past, determined to finish what he began. What followed was not a duel of blades, but of wills. The Emperor's power slams into them, a tidal wave of the dark side that crushes thought and motion. A like Mitrasuric fight to anchor Revan in the Force. Yet even together they are overwhelmed. Vitiate peels through their defenses with clinical precision. He does not kill Revan. Instead, he orders the exile cut down and has Revan taken alive. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. The Emperor senses in Revan something too valuable to waste a mind forged in Jedi discipline, tempered in Sith cruelty, and bound to both victory and failure in the depths beneath Dromund chaos. Revan's imprisonment begins. He is suspended in a field of crackling energy, body held in perfect stasis, while his consciousness is dragged into direct contact with the Emperor's mind. There, the story of his captivity becomes an invisible war. Revan is used as a living archive of strategies, memories, and secrets, each thought rifled through each tactic, analyzed and absorbed. Yet the Emperor underestimates the resilience that once defied the Jedi Council and led a Sith Empire over time. Revan turns captivity into resistance. He lashes out in the shared mental space, testing Vitiate's focus, forcing the Emperor to divide attention from his grand designs. The passage of years becomes impossible to measure. Decades blur into centuries as his body barely ages, but his mind is shattered and reforged again and again. Still, he endures in whispered impressions and half-formed doubts. He seeds hesitation into the Emperor's thoughts, delaying invasions, nudging him toward endless preparation, instead of immediate conquest. For the next 1,000 years, the hidden Sith Empire sharpens its blades, while its master stalls haunted by a prisoner who refuses to break the question is how long such a balance can last before something finally gives, and Revan's long vigil in the dark is interrupted from the outside. Echoes in the Old Republic. Revan's hidden influence on later wars. What followed was a war that did not begin with blaster fire, but with silence. In the dark, the hidden Sith Empire in the unknown regions sharpened its power in secret shipyards and storm-racked citadels, while the Republic healed from the Jedi Civil War. The question was not whether conflict would return, but when and in what terrible form. The answer lay partly with a single prisoner locked in a battle of wills with his own. A former master. In the centuries after Revan's capture, the Emperor's domain on Dromund Kaas grew from scattered survivors into a vast militarized empire. For the next 1,000 years, the Sith rebuilt their fleets in cavernous docks, hidden in nebulae and dead systems. They forged legions of Sith warriors, trained from birth in the dark side, and constructed a shadow bureaucracy of moffs and intelligence ministries, all preparing for a decisive galactic war that would erase the Republic from history. Over time, those plans should have ripened into immediate invasion, yet something kept stalling. The Emperor's hand campaigns were drafted, then abandoned hyperspace routes, surveyed, then sealed away. Whole armadas, commissioned only to sit in deep storage for decades. The story of this delay was written in a place no historian could see, in the quiet of the Emperor's throne room, where Revan's fractured mind pressed relentlessly against a godlike will. Revan's constant resistance did not defeat the Emperor, but it distorted him each time the Emperor reached out through the Force to chart conquest. Revan's presence introduced doubt, caution, and an obsession with perfection. What might have been a swift, overwhelming strike became a centuries-long exercise in hoarding power and rehearsing scenarios. The great galactic war that finally erupted was devastating, but the Republic faced it with rebuilt defenses. New Jedi Knights and hard lessons from the Mandalorian and Jedi Civil Wars had Revan fallen completely. The first blow would have come far earlier, against a shattered and exhausted galaxy. Beyond that unseen battlefield, Revan's influence seeped through artifacts and ideas. His holocrons lay hidden on worlds such as Dantooine Korriban and unknown vaults in the Outer Rim, carrying teachings that questioned rigid devotion to either light side or dark side. Some Jedi scholars quietly studied his campaigns against the Mandalorians, admiring his strategic brilliance while warning against his ruthlessness among the Sith. Ambitious acolytes whispered that Revan proved a single will could bend empires, and that true power meant understanding both compassion and cruelty. Over generations, Revan became a half-remembered figure, a disputed name in archives and meditation chambers. To some Jedi, he was a cautionary tale of arrogance to others, a rare example of adaptation in the face of galactic catastrophe. Sith historians claimed him as a Dark Lord whose legacy justified their empire, while heretical cults praised his return to the light side. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history in ways they barely understood. By the time the Hidden Empire finally emerged, Revan's body was absent from the stage. Yet the pattern of his life would shape the era to come defiance against impossible odds, adaptation to new truths, and a refusal to accept simple binaries of Jedi and Sith echoed in every treaty. Betrayal and secret alliance. The Great Galactic War was not merely the Emperor's design. It was the distant aftershock of a single mind that had once stood between annihilation and survival, and the galaxy had not yet seen the last of those echoes. The Foundry and the Split Self, Revan's fragmented return in the long shadow of that great galactic war. The echo of a single imprisoned mind finally began to crack. The silence power can endure for centuries, but what happens when a will is stretched beyond breaking, yet not allowed to die? The answer is the story of Revan's return, not as one being, but as a fracture in the Force itself. After nearly 300 years bound to the Emperor's presence, Revan's torment did not end with a clean escape. Instead, what followed was a shattering. His will had been pulled in two directions for so long that when the chains loosened, his psyche did not simply step free. It split. One aspect clung to the hope and restraint of the redeemed Jedi, who had once turned away from conquest. The other hardened into relentless hatred of the dark side that had stared into the Emperor's mind and seen only one solution: annihilation in the chaotic years after the Treaty of Coruscant. This division took form. The lighter aspect of Revan remembered the Mandalorian Wars, the Jedi Civil War, and the price of unchecked power. It accepted that the Sith Empire had to be opposed, but feared becoming the same kind of tyrant that had once worn his mask. It was cautious, measured, a strategist still bound by conscience over time. This fragment tried to guide events from the margins, urging allies to contain the Sith without burning the galaxy with them. The darker aspect had no such hesitation. It had endured centuries of mental war against the Emperor and emerged with a single ruthless conclusion: the Sith could not be reasoned with, only erased to achieve this. It turned to another relic of an older age, the Foundry, an ancient Rakatan superweapon hidden in deep space. A cousin to the Starforge, the Foundry could unleash endless droid armies and automated fleets, enough to scour entire sectors. Its design was cold, efficient, impersonal, perfect for a cleansing that would spare no world loyal to the Empire around this machine of extinction. Revan's legacy ignited new conflict. Revanite followers who saw him as a prophesied savior rallied to the dark aspect's banner, convinced that one last terrible war would shape a safer galaxy. Republic forces, alarmed by the scale of the threat, moved to stop the weapon, even as some among them still revered the redeemed Jedi of old Imperial agents, driven by survival and ambition, fought to save their empire from obliteration. Each side believed it understood Revan. Each held a different memory of the same man. The battles within the Foundry's metal caverns were more than clashes of soldiers and droids. They were a reflection of Revan's own divided soul. The light side fragment struggled to restrain the other, knowing that this act of mercy would reshape galactic history, yet fearing that mercy had already cost too much. The dark side fragment saw only unfinished war and necessary sacrifice. The tension between ruthless control and the search for balance that had defined Revan's life was now literal, made flesh in opposing selves, and as the Foundry roared toward activation, the galaxy stood on the edge of discovering which Revan would survive. Revan's final confrontation, letting go of the war as the Foundry's echoes faded into rumor and wreckage. The story of Revan moved toward its final chapter. Power had preserved him far beyond any natural span, but even the strongest will cannot hold the Force at bay forever. Across the galaxy, a new crisis drew both Republic and Sith Empire toward a single point, a shadow on Yavin 4. where the reborn Emperor's presence threatened to rise again through a fanatical cult. Around this time, Revan emerged once more, no longer content to act through machines or proxies. He gathered followers from across the galactic, fringe veterans of the Jedi Civil War, former Imperials, and those who believed that ending the Emperor justified any cost. His plan was simple and terrifying: to strike preemptively and annihilate the Emperor's essence by destroying his physical anchors on Yavin, regardless of who stood in the way. What followed was a convergence rarely seen in galactic history. Republic strike teams and Imperial war parties both traced the same disturbance in the Force, following different orders, yet walking the same jungle paths through Massassi ruins and ancient Sith temples. They found Revan at the heart of the storm, standing before a massive focusing device designed to channel lethal energy into the Emperor's lingering presence. The battlefield became a tangle of red and blue blades, artillery fire, and force storms, all orbiting around one man's refusal to let the war end. Revan fought with the ferocity of a legend, hurling aside troopers and Sith alike. His command of both dark side lightning and light side defensive techniques made him feel less like a soldier and more like a living nexus of the Force. Yet something in the confrontation shifted expectations. Republic and Imperial champions who should have been enemies were forced into uneasy alliance, realizing that Revan's obsession threatened both factions. If the Emperor survived enraged by the attack, he would simply consume more worlds over time. The duel became less a clash of armies and more an intervention. Revan's darker impulses, driven by centuries of torment and singular focus, insisted that only total annihilation of the Emperor mattered. Casualties were acceptable. Worlds were expendable. But as his opponents pressed him, as they repeated that others now carried the fight, a different truth surfaced. The war he had begun during the Mandalorian invasions had stretched across generations, and he was still trying to finish it alone. In the crucial moment, Revan's divided nature finally resolved. The light side self that had once walked away from the Foundry appeared as a spectral presence joined by the dark side remnant that had refused to yield. What they found there would change everything. Instead of struggling for dominance, the two aspects recognized themselves as fragments of a single life. The brilliant Jedi Knight, the ruthless Sith Lord, the weary prisoner, all were Revan, and neither the light nor the dark could exist healthily without the other. This act of inner reconciliation broke. The stalemate power bled from his attacks. The raging storms calmed, and Revan at last saw the faces around him, not as pieces on a Dejeric board, but as successors to a conflict he no longer needed to command. He acknowledged that the Emperor, now Valkorian to some, would be opposed by new generations, that his own place in the story of the Sith and Jedi was complete. In that acceptance came release. Revan's physical form failed under the strain of battle, but his presence did not vanish in terror or rage. Instead, it thinned and brightened, becoming a calm imprint within the Force, his light and dark aspects merging into a single, steady resonance. After centuries of struggle, guilt, and responsibility, he allowed himself to let go, to trust that the Force would shape what came next without his hand on the blade. This was not a triumphant victory. No cheering fleets, no coronation, only a quiet battlefield on an ancient Sith world, and the sense that a long overdue ending had finally arrived for a man who had been at war with himself and the galaxy for far too long. Yet even in that silence, Revan's legacy endured in the choices of those who survived, and in the subtle currents of the Force that still remembered his name. Legends, holocrons, and heresies. How? Later ages remember Revan in the centuries that followed that quiet ending. Revan did not simply vanish. He fractured the story of Revan, splintered into rumor half-remembered reports and the stubborn memories of those whose lives he had saved or shattered over time. The man became a pattern in the Force, more symbol than soldier. For later historians, the problem was simple. How does one write the story of someone whose mind had been rewritten, whose allegiances had reversed more than once? The answer was that no single account could hold him. Instead, his life scattered across Jedi archives, Sith, holocrons, and private journals, each one insisting on a different Revan, and insisting that theirs was the true one, Among the Jedi of later ages, Revan became a lesson told in meditation chambers and war rooms. Some masters held him up as a warning against interventionism. They spoke of the Mandalorian Wars and argued that the Council's restraint had been wisdom, that rushing to battle had opened a door the dark side was waiting to exploit in their telling. Revan was brilliant but impatient, a general who clung too tightly to outcomes and was devoured by the need to control them. Others, within the Order, quietly disagreed to them. Revan was a visionary who had seen a galactic threat the Council refused to acknowledge. They cited Cathar, the mask taken in grief and justice, the decisive strike at Malachor V, and the later journey into the unknown regions to confront a hidden Sith empire. In these texts, Revan was the Jedi who understood that the Force demanded hard choices when war threatened to consume entire worlds. The Sith who studied him saw something different still in their temples and academies. Revan's campaigns during the Jedi Civil War were analyzed as masterpieces of strategy. A former Jedi turning the Republic's strengths against itself. They praised his power, his ability to bend fleets and worlds to his will. Yet even there, something was unsettling. Revan had returned to the light side twice, had spared. Bastila had refused domination for its own sake. For many traditional Sith, this act of mercy would reshape galactic history, but it also made him dangerous an example. That power did not have to end in pure cruelty on the fringes of both. Traditions, new movements emerged. Revanite cults on Droman Khas and beyond gathered in hidden chambers, studying any fragment they could find. They rejected strict binaries of Jedi and Sith, arguing that Revan had walked through both and been defined by neither to them. The Force was not a ladder to rule an empire, nor a vow of denial, but a current to be understood through conflict and reconciliation. What followed was a quiet heresy, spreading through footnotes and forgotten worlds. Revan became a question more than an answer. Was he savior, conqueror, victim, or seer? In the end, his greatest legacy may have been the doubts he left behind, the sense that no single doctrine, no single victory could contain the full shape of one life. From Old Republic to Skywalker, Revan's distant shadow on canon. In the vast sweep of galactic history, Revan's doubts did not vanish. They simply sank beneath the surface of time for thousands of years. The galaxy turned and turned again. Empires rose and fell. Star maps faded into legend, and the names of ancient worlds were worn down to half-remembered myths. Yet the questions Revan posed about the Force and about the Jedi never truly disappeared. They waited by the time of the late Galactic Republic. Revan's age was already ancient around the era of the Clone Wars. The Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders were long gone. The old Sith Empire he fought and then opposed had crumbled into obscurity. Even the Jedi Civil War was a distant echo buried in archives and half-legible holocrons. What followed was a period where only scholars and reclusive masters might have recognized the mask or the name. Yet the pattern of events began to feel eerily familiar. Anakin Skywalker's fall traced a path Revan would have understood, a gifted Jedi hero drawn into war when the Republic called for power and decisive action. The Council hesitated again. Just as it had in the Mandalorian Wars, it tried to stand apart from politics while the conflict consumed entire worlds. Anakin believed he saw farther than his teachers. He trusted visions and personal attachment more than doctrine. And in that conviction, he stepped across the line into the dark side, where love turned to fear, and fear to control. The story of Darth Vader's redemption also carried a distant reflection of Revan. When Luke refused to kill his father on the second Death Star, he chose the same dangerous mercy Revan once showed Malak and countless enemies. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history as surely as Revan's choice to spare or redeem foes had altered his own era. It suggested that even at the heart of the dark, there remained a narrow path back to the light side if someone was willing to reach for it. After Endor, Luke's later exile on Hta echoed another of Revan's legacies, the recognition that the Jedi Order itself could become rigid blind to the living Force. Over time, Luke began to question whether training more Jedi under the old rules would simply repeat the cycle of war. And catastrophe raised struggle. Generations later, with lineage identity and the burden of inherited darkness mirrored Revan's fractured memory and shifting allegiances, she too was forced to ask whether destiny was blood name or choice. Hidden within Luke's collection of ancient Jedi texts, there could easily have been fragments from Revan's age marginal notes on the Mandalorian Wars, or veiled warnings about Sith empires that no one remembered by name. Yet even without direct records, the Force seemed to keep presenting the same dilemmas to new generations, as if testing different answers to an old question each time the Republic marched toward war. Each time the Jedi debated intervention. Revan's shadow lengthened, though. Unseen thinking of Revan alongside the Skywalkers does not change the films, but it deepens the sense of a continuous current beneath them. Heroes and villains repeating variations of the same melody across millennia. One era, whispering to the next and in the quiet. Between those echoes, another presence begins to stir from the depths of the unknown regions. Was Revan Jedi, Sith, or something else entirely? From that distant stirring in the unknown regions, a quieter question begins to take shape. Not about fleets or empires, but about identity. When a single life has worn so many faces, what remains underneath the mask? The answer in Revan's case is less a conclusion and more a constellation scattered across decades of conflict and contemplation. At the beginning stands the gifted Jedi prodigy, the brilliant Padawan who absorbed teachings faster than many masters and who walked the halls of the Jedi Temple with an almost dangerous ease. The story of Revan does not begin with a monster, but with a student in love with knowledge under Kriya and others. This young Jedi probed the boundaries of doctrine, asking why. The Order hesitated, while the Mandalorian threat grew on the outer rim. That restless curiosity would shape everything that followed. Then came the defiant general of the Mandalorian Wars, the masked commander who rallied thousands of Jedi to the front. When the Council urged restraint on Cathar, Revan took the fallen Mandalorian woman's mask as a vow of justice and never removed it in battle. What followed was a campaign of brilliant maneuvers and ruthless choices, orbital bombardments, decisive strikes against Mandalorian leadership, a Jedi who believed that victory through any means was a moral necessity. From there, the line blurs in the unknown regions. Revan and Malak confronted a lurking Sith power, and what they found there would change everything. They returned not as guardians, but as conquerors, Dark Lords of a reborn Sith empire, wielding the Starforge and the dark side to wage the Jedi civil war. Yet even this phase, fractured, Revan was not a simple tyrant. There were precise strikes against military targets, careful preservation of certain worlds, as if some distant part still calculated for the galaxy's long-term survival. After Malak's betrayal and the Council's intervention came the amnesiac hero, the Republic asset rebuilt through a controversial act of mercy. The Jedi reshaped his mind, and this act of mercy would reshape galactic history. The former Sith Lord became once more a Jedi champion, choosing the light side, not through dogma, but through relationships, loyalty, and hard-won trust. And when memory returned, Revan chose to face what he had been, rather than flee from it. Later, there was the imprisoned Resistor locked in a timeless struggle against the Sith Emperor, and finally, the fragmented Echo in the Force, torn between light and dark, yet still fighting to shield the galaxy from a greater shadow. So was Revan. Truly Jedi, the argument rests on sacrifice, the willingness to stand between the galaxy and annihilation again and again, and in the end to let go of control, even of his own legacy. Was Revan truly Sith there too? The evidence is strong, a belief in imposed order, a comfort with unilateral decisions, the readiness to bend institutions to personal vision. Whether Council or Empire, Revan trusted Revan above all. Perhaps the more unsettling possibility is that Revan stands ahead of his age, a primitive outline of a balanced Force user who draws on passion without surrendering entirely to hatred, who understands the dark side without wholly abandoning the light side over time. His life becomes a meditation on the Force itself, an energy that resists simple labels, that flows through Jedi and Sith and all the spaces between. In the stillness of galactic history, Revan's ambiguity becomes strangely soothing, a reminder that even in an era of absolutes, some figures remain unresolved. And as this masked presence fades, for now, another thread of the old Republic era begins to rise from the shadows, masks, names, and memory, the symbolism of Revan's life. In that rising thread, another dimension of Revan begins to emerge, a dimension made of symbols rather than battles, masks rather than starships, names rather than titles. The story of Revan is unusual even in galactic history because it refuses to give a simple answer to a simple question. Who was this person before the Mandalorian Wars, before the mask, before the fall? The records are silent, and the silence itself would shape everything that followed. There is no birth name, no family line, no homeworld spoken with certainty. Revan appears in the archives already half-formed, a gifted Jedi Padawan, a brilliant mind drawn to the edges of the known Force without a given origin. This figure begins to feel less like a conventional character and more like an archetype, a role that the Force needed someone to play a vessel for conflict and change rather than a single fixed identity. That sense of role becomes literal on the sands of Cathar, where Revan watches a vision of Mandalorian atrocities unfold among the dead lies, a fallen Mandalorian woman, her mask half buried in the dust. What they found there would change. Everything Revan lifts the mask and chooses to wear it from that moment forward, the face beneath becomes secondary. The mask becomes a vow, a promise of justice for the slaughtered Cathar, and a permanent reminder of the cost of inaction. Yet the same mask that represents commitment also conceals. It is a shield between Revan and the emotional weight of every decision. As the Mandalorian Wars escalate, as Jedi become generals and battle lines blur, the mask allows a separation between the person and the role, between the voice that doubts and the commander who orders orbital bombardments over time. The mask belongs less to Revan and more to the legend of Revan, the liberator, the conqueror, the Sith Lord. Then comes the fracture aboard Revan's flagship when the Jedi strike team disables the Dark Lord and the Council chooses a different path. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history instead of execution. There is erasure, memories stripped away, personality rebuilt, the dark side past buried. Beneath a new identity, the result is a quiet pattern. Interrupt in the middle of war, a Sith Lord transformed into a loyal Republic agent who does not remember ever being anything else. Memory in Revan's life becomes another kind of mask when the truth returns in fragments. The gentle Jedi of the present must confront the ruthless strategist of the past two selves, overlapping, but never perfectly aligned. The Force does not restore a single unified identity. Instead, it demands reconciliation, responsibility, and a choice about which memories will define the path forward. In that tension between names, masks, and memories, a softer reflection appears in the stillness of the listener's own roles and hidden faces, in the parts concealed from others, and the moments that still echo in the mind. The symbolism of Revan becomes a quiet meditation on change, on the possibility that even after great darkness, a different self can emerge. And as this meditation settles, another phase of Revan's journey begins to take shape beyond the known Republic. Revan and the ethics of the Jedi. When is inaction a sin? Beyond that familiar Republic, another kind of frontier waited not only in uncharted space, but in the quiet gap between action and restraint. In that space, the story of Revan and the Jedi Council became a meditation on ethics, played out against the roar of a galactic war. The Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders were burning worlds, yet the highest guardians of the light side chose stillness around the dawn of the Mandalorian Wars. The Council read the currents of the Force and saw more than armored warriors. They sensed echoes of ancient catastrophes, of dark empires and fallen orders. For thousands of years, the Jedi had watched how noble intentions could open the door to the dark side. So they ruled that the Order would not lead the Republic's war effort. They urged patience, protection only, and strict obedience to the will of the Force, as they understood it on the surface. This sounded prudent, but for Revan, walking among refugees on worlds already scarred by bombardment restraint, felt indistinguishable from abandonment. What followed was a growing conviction that refusing to act in the face of suffering was itself a moral failure. Even if the Force whispered caution, Revan argued that the Force also flowed through the terrified and the dispossessed, and that power unused in their defense carried its own shadow. The divide deepened as reports from the front grew darker. Republic fleets shattered Jedi Knights, pleading for guidance. The Council saw a trap, a conflict engineered to draw their champions into a wider snare, somewhere in the unknown regions. Revan saw only that every day of delay meant more dead and more worlds pushed toward despair. Over time, this tension hardened into open defiance when Revan finally led thousands of Jedi to the front. The choice was not only strategic, it was philosophical, a declaration that conscience could stand against command. This argument between caution and intervention would shape Jedi history far beyond Revan's era in the final centuries, before Yavin the Council again hesitated as the Republic decayed from within their fear of another Revan. Another militarized Jedi Order left them slow to confront the rising Sith Lord hidden in plain sight, later on the remote island of Archtu. Luke Skywalker initially refused to train Rey, haunted by his own failure and convinced that the most ethical path was withdrawal. The same question lingered: when does stepping back protect the light side? And when does it simply leave the galaxy to the dark in the quiet of the present? That question drifts closer, not as a judgment, but as an invitation. Every being moves along that spectrum between waiting and acting, between trusting that events must unfold and choosing to intervene without absolute certainty. There is no simple rule, only the awareness that both action and inaction leave marks. And as Revan's path bends toward the Mandalorian, front lines that uncertainty follows like a second shadow, setting the stage for choices that will echo far beyond one war: love, attachment, and duty. Revan and Bastila's bond. As Revan's path bends toward open war, another, quieter thread begins to weave through the story of his life. One that has nothing to do with fleets or battle plans, and everything to do with two minds pressed together by the Force. The story of Revan and Bastila Shan does not begin with a confession or a promise. It begins with captivity, when Revan falls to Malak's guns above the Outer Rim, and the Jedi Council chooses to spare him. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history to protect their fragile experiment. The Council assigns Bastila, the gifted young Jedi whose battle meditation had hunted Revan's Sith Empire across the stars during the ambush. A desperate effort to shield Revan from death creates a forced mental bond between them. What followed was something neither of them would have chosen: their thoughts, their dreams, their pain echoing back and forth in the currents of the Force. At first, this connection is a duty. Bastila stands as warden and guide, while the former Dark Lord wakes with no memory of the empire he built. Revan becomes her responsibility, not her companion. Their early exchanges are stiff-edged with argument. Bastila clings to the Jedi Code and the Council's authority, while Revan questions orders with the same restless intelligence that once led armies, yet over time shared danger on Taris Dantooine, and beyond begins to erode those sharp lines. They watch one another make small choices in quiet moments. Revan's instinct to protect strangers, Bastila's flashes of doubt when the Council withholds the full truth around the midpoint of the Jedi Civil War. Their bond has deepened into something more personal, but never loud. There are no dramatic declarations, just a gradual softening of voices, a hand resting a moment too long after a rescue, a meditation shared in silence where the boundary between two minds blurs into one field of calm. The Jedi Code warns that attachment leads to fear, and fear to the dark side. Yet here, attachment becomes another form of accountability. Each sees the other at their most vulnerable, and neither turns away on the light path. This fragile love becomes a shield rather than a weakness. When Bastila is captured and broken by Malak, she is twisted into a Sith weapon, her own battle meditation turned against the Republic, but the bond remains a thread. Revan follows it to her, not as conqueror this time, but as someone who refuses to abandon her. His presence recalls who she was before the dark side. His forgiveness gives her a reason to betray Malak and return to the light side even at the cost of her own safety. Their relationship remains a quiet current beneath galactic conflict, yet it would shape everything that follows it. Hints at a truth: The Jedi often fear to name that selfless love can inspire sacrifice just as easily as it can awaken greed. And as Revan moves toward the final confrontation with his former apprentice, the question lingers: what happens when that same bond is tested against the full weight of the Sith, Revan's companions, mirrors to a fragmented soul? That question is answered not only in battles and grand strategies, but in the quiet presence of those who walked beside Revan. Power bends the galaxy, but what happens when that power is refracted through many different lives and loyalties? The answer is the story of Revan's companions, each one a mirror held up to a fragmented soul. Cathar stands first among these reflections, a Republic soldier and pilot. He is a man hollowed out by betrayal, watching the galactic war tear apart his family and his faith in leadership. Under Saul Karath and later under Malak Sith, Carth saw worlds burned and comrades turned. Over time, this left him suspicious, always waiting for the next line. Traveling with the amnesiac Revan, Carth's mistrust echoes Revan's own buried guilt. A leader who once shattered the Republic, now forced to earn the trust of a man broken by that very Sith campaign. Every hesitant question Carth asks about the past becomes a quiet interrogation of Revan's conscience. In contrast, Jolee Bindo appears as a glimpse of what Revan might become if the path bends toward weary wisdom instead of pure darkness. An old man living in self-imposed exile on Kashyyyk, he has stepped outside the Jedi Order without abandoning the Force. He remembers the Mandalorian Wars, the Jedi Civil War, and the endless cycle of conflict between light side and dark side. His wry stories of failed marriages, disobedient Padawans, and misguided counsels are not mere comic relief. They are warnings wrapped in reminiscence. Through Jolee, the narrative suggests a future where Revan could accept imperfection, acknowledge the flaws of both Jedi and Sith, and still believe in something greater than either empire. Then there is HK-47, a different mirror entirely. Built by Revan during the height of the Sith Empire, this assassin droid embodies the cold, utilitarian violence that once defined Revan's campaigns. HK speaks of meat bags and targeted eliminations with clinical enthusiasm, cataloguing assassinations and mass casualties as tactical necessities. In his presence, the mask of the redeemed hero slips, revealing the architect of a war who once saw sentient lives as variables in a strategic equation. HK-47 is the dark side of Revan's genius, preserved in metal and memory. Mission Vao and Zalbar offer a softer, but no less important reflection. A teenage Twi'lek and her Wookiee friend, they come from the underbelly of Taris, far from Jedi temples or Sith citadels. Their concerns begin with survival, found family, and simple loyalty. Yet what followed was their entanglement in a galactic conflict far beyond their choosing. Through Mission's optimism and Zalbar's life debt, the scale of Revan's journey is grounded in small acts of trust, sharing food on the Ebon Hawk, defending each other in streets and forests, choosing mercy over power on Kashyyyk. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history in miniature, reminding Revan that every strategic decision touches ordinary lives. Taken together, these companions form a living commentary on Revan's choices. Carth tests his honesty, Jolee questions his philosophy, HK exposes his former ruthlessness, and Mission and Zalbar reveal the cost of empire on the powerless. By watching how they change as Revan's truth emerges, the story of the man beneath the mask becomes clearer, setting the stage for the final decisions that would shape the fate of both Jedi and Sith. Cycles of war and redemption, placing Revan in the larger pattern as those companions circle around Revan's hidden past. Another pattern begins to emerge, not just the story of one man, but the rhythm of the entire galaxy, rising, falling, pausing, and then rising again. Revan's life becomes a small model of a much larger design, from the Mandalorian Wars to the Jedi Civil War. His path moves in waves. He rises to power as a brilliant Jedi general, then falls into the dark as a Sith Lord. He is shattered and remade by the Council's intervention, then seeks redemption against the very empire he once commanded. What followed was not a straight line to peace, but a return to the same conflict on a higher level. The same questions of control, of mercy, of how far the light side can bend before it breaks. In this, Revan mirrors the wider galactic pattern. The old republic that raised him would crumble into later empires. The Sith Empire he forged in secret echoes forward into Palpatine's New Order. The Jedi Civil War prefigures the Clone Wars and the rise of Darth Vader. The rebellion against the Empire foreshadows the resistance against the First Order. Again and again, Republic-Empire rebellion, New Republic First Order. The same struggle for power, repeating with new faces and new scars. The Force in these stories does not move in straight lines. It moves in tides. When the dark side swells too far, champions of the light side appear. When the Jedi grow rigid and distant, new Sith arise to challenge their certainty. Revan is one of these corrections, a Jedi who breaks from the Council, a Sith who breaks from his own empire. A single mind pulled back and forth as the Force searches for balance that never quite holds over time. This rhythm stretches across centuries for thousands of years. The same themes return: fear, leading to tyranny, hope answering with rebellion, empires burning down, so that new orders can grow in the ashes. Revan's journey from Padawan to warlord, from masked conqueror to reluctant savior, from prisoner of the true Sith Emperor to half-remembered legend, would shape the choices of those who came after. Even when his name is forgotten, the pattern he embodied remains. There is something strangely gentle in seeing it. This way, each war becomes not an isolated catastrophe, but another crest in a long, slow wave. Each fall to the dark, another verse in a familiar song. Each act of redemption, a quiet refrain of light. In the distance, the galaxy breaks and then mends, never perfectly, but always enough to continue. As Revan moves toward his final confrontation with the hidden Sith in the unknown regions, the pattern prepares to repeat once more, a familiar tide drawing back before it crashes again, the quiet legacy. What the galaxy owes to Revan in the quiet that follows those rising and falling tides, a different question emerges when a single life touches so many turning points in galactic history. How is its legacy measured? The answer in Revan's case is not in absolutes of light side or dark side, but in the long shadows cast across centuries around the time of the Mandalorian Wars. Revan's first great intervention altered the fate of entire sectors. The Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders were burning worlds. From the Outer Rim, inward enslaving populations and glassing planets such as Serrico. By defying the Jedi Council and taking command of the Republic war effort, Revan halted that advance at Malachor V and elsewhere. Countless worlds that would have fallen simply did not. What followed was a brutal victory, but it was still a victory, and for millions that meant survival. Yet the cost of that salvation was immense. The mass shadow generator over Malachor did not distinguish between Mandalorian and Republic soldier. In a single instant, fleets were crushed into the planet's wound. The echo of that decision would shape the lives of veterans for decades. Many of Revan's own followers left the war haunted and broken. Some would later drift into the Sith Triumvirate's grasp. Others would never again fully trust the Jedi Council or the Republic they had bled to protect after the war. Revan's journey into the unknown regions delayed an even greater catastrophe, confronting the hidden Sith Emperor. On Dromund Kaas, he forced the Dark Ruler to reconsider a direct assault on the Republic. The Emperor turned instead to patience, ritual, and manipulation. Entire invasions were postponed. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, not through kindness, but through resistance that bought the Republic precious centuries to rebuild the state that would one day nurture the Rebel Alliance. And the New Republic, set against this reprieve, stands the devastation of the Jedi Civil War under Darth Revan and Darth Malak. The Sith Empire they forged shattered shipyards and worlds from Taris to Dantooine. Jedi were hunted temples, burned trade routes, collapsed under blockade and piracy. For thousands of years later, historians would still trace economic scars back to that conflict. Each Sith victory meant another refugee convoy, another lost archive, another generation raised amid ruins over time. However, Revan's defiance of the Jedi Council became a different kind of legacy. By challenging the Order's rigid non-intervention during the Mandalorian threat, Revan exposed how detachment could become neglect debates ignited in meditation chambers and academies should the Jedi wait for perfect clarity in the Force while entire systems burn or accept that imperfect action may sometimes be necessary. The story of that argument echoed into the Clone Wars and beyond. Philosophically, Revan left a more subtle mark within both Jedi and Sith traditions. A persistent question whispered in archives and war rooms is strict doctrine truly wisdom or a cage? The Jedi saw in Revan the danger of passion unrestrained, yet also the strength of compassion that refused to stand aside. The Sith saw a will to power that nearly conquered the Republic, yet also a mind that rejected mindless cruelty and dogma. In the end, Revan's legacy is less a balance sheet and more a fault line, running through history, lives saved and lives lost, empires delayed and empires born. Questions asked that could never again be unasked, and somewhere beyond the known maps, the path Revan walked through the unknown regions still waits for the next traveler to follow. Drifting into the Force, a soft recap of Revan's journey. Over time, the sharp edges of Revan's choices blur, and what remains is a single continuous line drawn through the Force, a line that begins with a child whose name is never truly known, only the mask of Revan that history remembers. The story of that child begins in the quiet halls of the Jedi, where a mind too curious for comfort asks questions about the dark and the light, about why suffering spread across the galactic rim, while the Order waited and watched under teachers such as Kriya. That curiosity deepened into something more focused, a conviction that knowledge without action was hollow. When the Mandalorian War erupted across the Outer Rim, Revan stepped forward as others hesitated, taking Jedi and soldiers into a conflict the Council wished to avoid. What followed was a campaign of daring, arcane strategies and ruthless decisions. A brilliant general who wore a fallen Mandalorian's mask as a promise to the dead of Cathar, and each victory carried Revan further from the patience of the light side and closer to a colder understanding of power. In the unknown regions beyond known maps, Revan and Malak pursued a hidden threat, and what they found there would change everything. A waiting Sith Emperor, ancient and vast, an empire in shadow, and a revelation that the coming storm would dwarf the current war faced with that enormity. Revan bent rather than broke, turning to the dark side, not for simple conquest, but to forge weapons and fleets strong enough to stand against a deeper night. This was the moment when the Jedi General became the masked Sith Lord, when compassion narrowed into a willingness to bear burdens others could not or would not. The Jedi civil war that followed would shape worlds and destinies, yet even here, the tale softens around its harshest angles. Battles become distant, thunder as one sees only a dark figure guiding an armada, then falling to betrayal under Malak's guns, rescued by the Jedi. Not with a blade, but with a quiet experiment. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. A broken mind gently rewritten, a Sith Lord, reborn as an amnesiac wanderer who learned again to care, to doubt and to choose. Through new companions and old echoes, Revan walked the path back to the light side, piecing together a life once lived in shadow, until the final confrontation with Malak closed that chapter and opened another with the war ended and the Republic breathing again. Revan felt the pull of the unknown regions and the unfinished threat waiting there. The last years pass in a softer haze, imprisonment in the cold grasp of the true Sith Emperor, a mind locked in endless resistance for centuries, and then release fragmentary and fading until Revan becomes more presence than person, more echo than warrior over time. Even that echo quiets, leaving only stories told. Under starlight reminders that even the greatest Sith and Jedi pass beyond conflict and war into a stillness where every question, every burden and every struggle finally comes to rest. Sleep among the stars, closing reflections and gentle farewell. Over time, the Force itself becomes the only witness that never forgets every choice, every whispered vow, every fall and every return is held in that quiet current that binds the galactic spiral together. The story of Revan is only one thread in that vast design, yet it glows for a moment brighter than most farmer and senator, smuggler and soldier, Sith warlord and wandering Jedi, all are gathered there. remembered without judgment, in a tapestry that stretches beyond any temple or throne. For thousands of years, sages have argued about power and destiny, about the dark side and the light side, and about whether any life can matter against the scale of empires and war. The answer in the end is simple. The Force remembers. It remembers the masked general standing on the ashes of Malachor V. It remembers the broken prisoner resisting a hidden emperor in the dark. It remembers the redeemed hero choosing mercy when vengeance seemed easier, and it holds each of those selves gently until the conflict fades around this moment in the story. There is no more need for battle meditation or desperate plans. The fleet that once answered Revan's command rest in their dock, hyperspace lanes that once blazed with troop ships and hunted convoys run dim and quiet. The great engines cool. The last echoes of Sith and Jedi strategy fall silent, and what followed was not another campaign, but a long exhale. Temples on Coruscant Dantooine and Droman Khas stand in stillness stone and durasteel, remembering chants and screams, yet offering only silence in return. Somewhere beyond known charts, where Revan once vanished into the unknown regions, the stars continue their slow turning, uncaring and yet utterly present. The mask that once defined a legend is only a relic now, a face without a face, a reminder that even the most feared Sith Lord becomes a story told in low voices, and then a story half remembered, and then only a feeling in the Force, a faint impression of will and sorrow and hard-won peace. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, not only in the wars it ended, but in the quiet that followed, when no one needed to raise a blade in Revan's name again. In that same quiet, a drifting mind can find its own resting place. What happens when questions have chased each other in circles for too long? The answer is that they can be set down for a while. As Revan once released command and burden and identity itself, the thoughts that marched all day can stand down. The worries that felt endless can loosen their grip and fall away. Breathing slows, matching the rhythm of distant suns turning unseen beyond the hulls of sleeping cruisers. In imagination, a single small presence floats among those stars held in the same vast field that carried Revan. Through every rise and fall, no demand, no test, only the gentle pull of the Force, wrapping around awareness as a cloak of night. The story settles now around that resting mind, not as a weight, but as a blanket of distant starlight. Every battle resolved, every question postponed until only stillness remains, so the tale drifts to its end without fanfare. Revan's echo fading into the same deep calm that waits behind every legend. The galaxy for this moment lies at peace, and the long arc of history can continue without needing to be followed any further. Tonight the Force remembers the journey that has been traced, and the quiet listener who has traveled beside it, and in that shared silence, thought and memory are free at last to drift unhurried into sleep.